Nobody on Bravo ward had asked her name in 3 weeks. PFC Denny Oren had watched her every morning since his first day at Fort Brennan's Rehabilitation and Surgical Clinic, watched her come in before the lights were up, set the ice trays, log the night chart updates in handwriting so clean it looked machine printed, and then stand at the supply counter with a coffee she never seemed to finish. She wore the same faded army-issue scrubs as everyone else on the ward. She moved the way certain people move when they have long ago stopped needing anyone's approval, quiet, purposeful, a little too composed for a room that ran on controlled noise. Her name was Adele Voss. She was the PT aide assigned to the back half of Bravo ward. Her job, as Colonel Harlan Merck had explained to her on her first day and reminded her of twice since, was ice packs, mobility drills, and chart updates, in that order only. Denny had heard him say it again that morning, about 40 minutes before everything changed. A training accident call had come in from the range, 6 vehicles, bad terrain, the kind of rollover that fills a ward in 20 minutes. Merck had walked the length of the bay doing his pre-intake walk, pointing out what needed to move, what needed to clear. He stopped at Adele without breaking stride. "Aides don't do triage," he said. "Clear the south hall and keep it clear." She didn't answer. She turned and began moving equipment from the hallway, hands steady, face empty of anything Denny could read. He thought about that later. The emptiness. How it wasn't the blankness of someone who hadn't heard. It was something else. The kind of quiet a person builds after they have already said everything that mattered, a long time ago, in a place no one here had been. The casualties came in hard. 14 soldiers from the 3rd Training Group, 1 sergeant major, and 1 civilian safety observer, 16 total, sorted on the intake pad into 3 categories before the first gurney rolled through the door. Merck worked the red tag bay with his senior corpsman, Captain Avery running the second line, 2 nurses cycling the green tag overflow. Denny stood at the South Hall entrance doing exactly what he'd been told. He saw it happen in stages, the way you see a thing that doesn't register until it's already passed. The man in Bay 3 was the worst of them, Staff Sergeant Cole Rennick, blunt trauma, spinal percussion, airway obstruction building behind the sternum. His oxygen numbers were dropping. Merck was across the room on Bay 1, hands inside a wound, couldn't be pulled. The corpsman called it twice. Captain Avery was elbow deep in her own patient. Nobody moved to Bay 3. Denny's legs did something before his brain did. He took 2 steps toward the bay and then stopped, because Adele was already through the curtain. She didn't run. She walked. She pulled on gloves from the left pocket of her scrubs, not the cart, her pocket, which meant she had already been wearing them, and she looked at Rennick's face for roughly 2 seconds the way you look at a math problem whose answer you already know. "Suction," she said. Her voice was the same voice she used to explain an ankle mobility drill. The nearest nurse, PFC Hara, hesitated a fraction of a second and then handed it over. Adele ran the suction line, tilted, checked the airway manually with 2 fingers, assessed the secondary obstruction in a single motion, and reached for the surgical kit on the crash cart before the corpsman had made it halfway across the room. "I need the 7.0 tube and a 10 blade, she said. "Benadryl in the second drawer, 42 mils, and pull the epinephrine now." The 1 to 10,000. The corpsman stopped. He looked at the crash cart drawer. He pulled the epinephrine. Colonel Merck's voice came from behind her. "Aide. Step back from that patient." She did not step back. "Benadryl's in," Hara said. Adele placed the surgical airway with both hands, clean and deliberate, no wasted motion. 90 seconds from the moment she walked through the curtain, Rennick's oxygen numbers climbed. His color changed. The monitor stopped alarming. "I said step back." Merck's voice had the particular edge of a man who is not accustomed to being ignored by someone who does not outrank him. He moved toward the bay. "Who authorized?" "His trachea was closing," Adele said. She did not turn around. She was watching Rennick's chest rise and fall. "The Benadryl is for secondary anaphylaxis from the road chemicals. You'll want the lipid panel before you close Bay 1. She stripped her gloves. "That's a tire fire residue pattern on his left forearm. I've seen it." Merck stopped. He looked at Rennick. He looked at the monitor. Denny watched it happen from the hall entrance, the colonel standing with his mouth open, working at something that wouldn't come. The monitor beeping in steady time. Rennick breathing. Stay in the South Hall, Merck said. He said it quietly. He went back to Bay 1. She returned to the South Hall. Denny looked at her. She looked at the far wall for a moment and then looked at him. Lipid panel, she said. Remind him in 6 minutes if he forgets. He didn't know what to say. She had already turned back toward the supply counter and picked up her coffee. He stood in the South Hall for another minute, listening to the ward work around him, the wheel of the supply cart, the low voice of Captain Avery calling a number across the room, the steady beep from Bay 3 that had gone from rapid and climbing to slow and even. He looked at the Bay 3 curtain. He looked at the spot on the floor where she had stood. 90 seconds. He had counted. An hour and 40 minutes later, with the ward stabilized and 2 of the red tags moved to post-op, Staff Sergeant Cole Rennick opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the curtain. He looked at the woman refilling a water tray 3 beds down the aisle, her back to him, her handwriting on his chart. He said one word. Thornline. Denny heard it. He wasn't sure what it meant. Adele set the water tray down. She turned. She looked at Rennick for a long moment, the kind of long moment that has a history inside it, the kind that doesn't belong in a rehabilitation ward. Rennick's eyes had the look of a man surfacing from somewhere very deep. He said it again, softer. Thornline. You're here. She walked to his bedside. She checked his pulse. She adjusted his blanket. She did not confirm or deny anything. But her hands, Denny noticed, were not entirely steady. They came in at 1600 hours. 8 of them. Dress uniform, all of them, the kind worn for formations and for funerals and for things that need to be said in front of other people. They came through the front entrance of the clinic in a single file and they asked the duty nurse for Bravo Ward, and the duty nurse, who had not been asked anything like that before, pointed down the hall and then stood at the desk a moment watching them go, because there was something in how they moved, unhurried, aligned, each man leaving a precise half-step between himself and the men ahead, that made her feel she was witnessing something that had been a long time coming. Denny was at the supply cabinet when they came through the ward door. He recognized the rank on the first man's collar, a sergeant major, and he straightened automatically, the way 22-year-olds do when rank walks into a room. The sergeant major looked down the bay. He saw Adele at the far end, logging chart updates, her back to the door. He said her call sign. He said it at conversational volume, the way a man says a word he has said in his sleep. Thornline. She turned. There were 8 of them and they all looked at her the same way, the way men look at someone they have not seen since the worst night of their lives. One of them, a young staff sergeant near the back, pressed his fist to his mouth for a moment and looked at the ceiling. Denny did not understand any of it yet. But something in him went very still. It was Brigadier General Dana Karras who came in behind them. She was in service dress, a manila folder under her arm, and she walked with the particular economy of someone who has decided what she is going to do and has no intention of being talked out of it. She asked the duty nurse for Colonel Merck. Merck came to the ward entrance. He looked at the 8 operators. He looked at the general. He looked at Adele Voss, standing in the middle of the bay with a clipboard in her hands. General, he said carefully. Doctor. She opened the folder. Staff Sergeant Voss served as a Special Operations Combat Medic with the 7th Support Detachment, Fort Catter. She completed the SOCM qualification course at 26, youngest in her class, first female graduate on record. Karras did not look at Merck while she read. She looked at the folder. On March 14, 5 years ago, the detachment firebase at Duran Ridge collapsed under sustained indirect fire. Both commissioned officers went down in the first 30 minutes. Staff Sergeant Voss assumed the role of senior medical authority for 11 hours. She paused. She treated 8 critically wounded operators. She managed blood supply, surgical airways, and secondary triage under active fire, alone, without resupply. All 8 survived. The ward was very quiet. One of the monitors beeped. Nobody moved. She was awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor. The citation was classified per the detachment's operational requirements. It was never read aloud. The general closed the folder. Until now. She read it. It took 4 minutes. The ward staff stood where they were. Hara, who had handed over the suction line 2 hours ago, stood at the foot of Bay 4 with her hands folded. The corpsman who had pulled the epinephrine was at the supply cart. Neither of them moved. Merck stood at the ward entrance. His face had taken on the look of a man doing arithmetic he does not like the answer to. When the general finished, the sergeant major moved first. He came to attention, spine straight, chin level, heels together, the way soldiers come to attention when the motion means something beyond the regulation. The 7 men behind him followed, 1 breath apart. Denny came to attention without deciding to. He found out later that PFC Hara had done the same. The corpsman. The duty nurse at the door. Every person in the ward, in the order they understood. Colonel Merck was the last. He came to attention slowly, like a man learning something in real time that he could not revise. Adele had not moved from the center of the bay. She stood with the clipboard at her side, and she looked at the 8 men in their dress uniforms, and she looked at the general, and she looked at Rennick in Bay 3, who had raised his left fist from the bed in a gesture that cost him something. She nodded once. Not a bow. Not a collapse. The nod of a person who has kept a promise for a long time and is watching it kept back. The sergeant major stepped forward. He reached into his breast pocket and set a worn challenge coin on the supply counter beside her coffee cup. It had the 7th Detachment crest on one face and on the other, scratched in by hand, 2 words, Thornline/Duran. "We made a promise," he said. "Wherever you went. However long it took." The general set the folder on the counter beside the coin. She looked at Merck. It was not a long look and it did not need to be. Denny thought about it that night, walking home across the base parking lot in the dark. He thought about all the mornings she had been the first one in the ward. The ice trays, the chart updates, the handwriting so clean it looked machine printed. The coffee she never finished. The way she had pulled the gloves from her own pocket. He thought about Rennick's color changing. 90 seconds. He thought about the sergeant major's coin, and what it meant that 8 men had kept a promise across 5 years and 2 assignments and whatever other distances come between a firebase collapse and a Tuesday afternoon in a rehabilitation ward. He had not known, any of those mornings, that he was watching something. He knew now. He thought that was probably the lesson, that the most important things in a room are sometimes the things no one has thought to ask about. That the quietest person in a ward can be the one carrying the most, and the heaviest weight is not always visible, and some promises are kept in ice trays and chart updates until the day they are finally spoken aloud. He would not forget her name again. He thought of Colonel Merck, standing last. He did not feel contempt for the men. He felt something stranger, a kind of understanding that the world contains things that look like one thing from the outside and are entirely another, and that the cost of not looking closely is sometimes measured in the 90 seconds you spend standing in a hallway while someone else does what needed doing. He hoped he would remember that. He intended to.